The breaking point had come during a required presentation on innovative applications of machine learning. Maya had spent weeks researching a genuinely fascinating project about using AI to help elderly people maintain independence through predictive health monitoring. Her technical research was thorough, her insights were original, and her proposed solution was both practical and scalable. But when it came time to present, Maya had stood in front of her classmates and literally lost her voice. She had managed to whisper through the first few slides before panic took over completely. Her carefully prepared presentation became a series of apologetic mumbles interrupted by long silences, while she stared at her notes, unable to look up at the 40 faces watching her struggle. By the time she reached her conclusion, half the class was checking their phones, and her professor was looking at her with the kind of pitying expression reserved for people who clearly didn't belong. The worst part wasn't the humiliation of failing so publicly. The worst part was that her ideas had been genuinely good, better than most of the flashy but superficial projects her classmates had presented with such confidence. Maya had learned that in tech culture, it didn't matter how smart or innovative you were if you couldn't sell yourself, and she simply didn't have whatever internal mechanism allowed people to believe they deserved attention and recognition. After dropping out, Maya had spent 6 months in her childhood bedroom, sleeping 12 hours a day and avoiding any conversation about her future. Her parents had oscillated between disappointment and concern, unable to understand how their daughter could possess obvious intelligence yet lack the basic social skills necessary for professional success. They had suggested therapy, career counseling, and various self-help programs designed to build confidence, but Maya knew that her problem wasn't fixable through techniques or strategies. Maya wasn't broken or damaged. She was simply wired differently than the world expected her to be. She found deep satisfaction in careful, detailed work that contributed to something larger than herself, but she had no interest in being the face of that work or receiving individual credit for it. In a culture that celebrated personal brands and thought leaders, Maya wanted to be useful rather than visible, helpful rather than celebrated. The job at Riverside Community College's bookstore had been perfect for Maya's temperament and current life situation. She worked mostly alone, organizing inventory and helping students find the materials they needed for their classes. The work was methodical and satisfying in its own way, and it allowed her to observe the educational process from a unique angle without having to participate in its more competitive aspects. Maya had developed a genuine appreciation for community. College students, who were often juggling work and family responsibilities while pursuing education later in life or with fewer resources than traditional university students. They approached learning with a seriousness and gratitude that she found refreshing after her experience at Stanford, where many students seemed to take their opportunities for granted. Her favorite part of the job was helping students who reminded her of her grandmother, older adults who were returning to school after decades in the workforce, or immigrants who were navigating American higher education for the first time. These students often needed more patience and explanation than traditional college-aged customers, and Maya discovered that she had a natural talent for breaking down complex information into manageable pieces. Maya's co-workers had initially assumed she was just passing through, using the bookstore job as a temporary stop while she figured out her next move. But as months passed and Maya showed no signs of leaving, they began to appreciate the quiet competence she brought to the workplace. She never called in sick, never complained about difficult customers, and had an uncanny ability to anticipate problems before they became serious issues. Mrs. Rodriguez, the bookstore manager, had tried several times to convince Maya to consider pursuing management training or transferring to a position with more responsibility and higher pay. But Maya always politely declined, explaining that she was happy with her current role and didn't want additional pressure or visibility. Mrs. Rodriguez respected Maya's decision while privately wondering what had happened to make such an obviously intelligent young woman so afraid of her own potential. What Maya's co-workers didn't know was that she spent her evenings engaged in work that would have impressed her former Stanford classmates if they had known about it. Maya had become a freelance translator and cultural consultant, working primarily with small businesses that needed help communicating with international partners, but couldn't afford the high-end consulting firms that served major corporations. Her specialty was helping American companies understand the cultural nuances that could make or break business relationships in Asian markets. Maya's childhood experience of serving as a bridge between her Taiwanese grandmother and American-born family members had given her an intuitive understanding of how cultural differences could create miscommunication even when language wasn't a barrier. Maya worked with family-owned restaurants trying to import authentic ingredients, small manufacturing companies seeking overseas partners, and non-profit organizations attempting to establish international programs. Her clients valued her ability to explain not just what to say, but why certain approaches would be effective or offensive in different cultural contexts. This work paid significantly more than her bookstore job, but Maya kept both because she genuinely enjoyed the routine and social interaction that her retail work provided. She also appreciated having income that wasn't dependent on her ability to constantly find new clients or promote her services. The combination of steady employment and freelance work gave Maya enough financial stability to live independently, while pursuing the kind of detailed, behind-the-scenes work that suited her personality. Maya's apartment reflected her preference for substance over style. Located in a quiet neighborhood between downtown San Francisco and the college campus, it was a tiny studio with high ceilings and large windows that filled the space with natural light. Maya had furnished it with pieces from thrift stores and estate sales, choosing items for their functionality and craftsmanship rather than their trendiness. The space was organized with the same methodical attention to detail that Maya brought to everything else in her life. Her desk was positioned to catch the morning light, and it was always clear except for whatever project she was currently working on. Her bookshelf contained an eclectic mix of language textbooks, cultural studies, business guides, and fiction from authors around the world. The walls were decorated with maps, including several that Maya had drawn herself during quiet weekends. Maya's evening routine was as carefully structured as her work schedule. She would arrive home around 6, prepare a simple dinner while listening to podcasts about international business or cultural anthropology, then spend 2 to 3 hours working on translation projects. Before bed, she would read for an hour, alternating between fiction and non-fiction in whatever language she was trying to improve. It was a quiet life by Silicon Valley standards, lacking the networking events, startup launches, and career-focused social gatherings that dominated her parents' social calendar. But Maya had found peace in creating a life that matched her values, rather than trying to force herself into expectations that had never fit her temperament. Maya's parents had gradually accepted their daughter's choices, though they still harbored hopes that she would eventually return to a more conventional career path. They had stopped asking about her 5-year plan or suggesting business school applications, recognizing that pressure only seemed to make Maya retreat further into herself. Instead, they focused on appreciating the qualities that made Maya unique: her thoughtfulness, her reliability, and her genuine care for other people. Maya's relationship with her parents had actually improved since she stopped trying to become the ambitious, outgoing daughter they had initially expected. When she visited for family dinners, she could participate in conversations about their work without feeling pressure to compete or prove herself. She asked thoughtful questions about their projects and offered insights that came from her unique perspective as someone who understood both technical concepts and human needs. Maya's younger brother Kevin, now a senior at UC Berkeley, studying electrical engineering, had become one of her strongest supporters. While their parents still sometimes worried that Maya was wasting her potential, Kevin recognized that his sister had found a way to contribute meaningfully to the world without sacrificing her mental health or authentic self. Kevin often brought friends to Maya's apartment when they needed help with international projects or cultural questions for their classes. Maya had become an unofficial resource for students working on global initiatives, and she found these informal consulting sessions much more rewarding than the structured networking events she had dreaded during her time at Stanford. Through Kevin's friends, Maya had begun to understand that there were many people in tech who shared her preference for substance over self-promotion. The difference was that most of them had found ways to navigate the industry's social expectations while maintaining their core values, something Maya still struggled with despite her growing confidence in other areas of her life. Maya's morning encounter with Robert Chen had shaken something loose in her carefully constructed routine. For the first time in months, she found herself wondering about possibilities beyond her current life, not because she was dissatisfied with what she had built, but because someone had seen potential in her that she had forgotten existed. That evening, as Maya sat with Robert Chen's business card and tried to process what she had learned about his identity, she realized that her simple act of kindness had connected her to exactly the kind of opportunity she had convinced herself she didn't want. The question now was whether she had the courage to explore what that connection might mean, or whether she would let fear and self-doubt convince her to stay safely invisible. Maya had always believed that her quietness was a limitation, a personality flaw that prevented her from succeeding in a world that rewarded boldness and self-advocacy. But Robert Chen had suggested something different, that her observational skills and gentle approach to helping others might actually be valuable assets rather than professional liabilities. The possibility that her authentic self might be exactly what someone was looking for was both thrilling and terrifying. Maya had spent so much energy trying to protect herself from disappointment and rejection that she had forgotten what it felt like to hope for something beyond simple contentment and security. Maya stared at the business card for 3 days before she found the courage to make the call. During those 3 days, she had Googled Robert Chen so thoroughly that she could probably write his biography. Yet she still couldn't quite believe that the soft-spoken man who had needed help crossing the street was the same person featured on the covers of Fortune and Time magazines as one of the most influential leaders in technology. The articles painted a picture of someone almost mythical in the tech world. Robert Chen had founded Nexus Innovations at 24, with a revolutionary algorithm that could predict human behavior patterns with unprecedented accuracy. Unlike most tech founders who had become celebrities, Robert had deliberately avoided the spotlight, rarely giving interviews and never appearing on the conference circuit that made stars out of other Silicon Valley executives. What fascinated Maya most were the stories about Robert's unconventional leadership style. Employees described a CEO who would show up unannounced in different departments, not to check on productivity, but to understand how the company's work affected real people's lives. He was known for making decisions based on extensive research into how products would impact users' daily experiences, rather than just market potential or profit margins. Maya found interview excerpts where Robert talked about his philosophy that true innovation came from understanding human needs that people couldn't articulate themselves. He believed that the most important insights came from observing how people actually behaved, rather than listening to what they said they wanted. This approach had made Nexus Innovations successful not just financially, but in creating products that genuinely improved people's lives. Reading about Robert's business philosophy, Maya began to understand why her approach to helping him cross the street had made such an impression. She hadn't asked him what he needed or assumed she knew what would help. She had observed his situation, identified the specific challenge he was facing, and offered assistance in a way that preserved his dignity and autonomy. Without realizing it, she had demonstrated exactly the kind of human-centered thinking that Robert valued most. On Friday afternoon, Maya finally dialed the number on Robert's business card. Her hands were shaking as she listened to the phone ring, and she had already decided to hang up if anyone other than Robert answered. She wasn't prepared to explain to a secretary or assistant why she was calling, and she certainly wasn't ready to navigate the kind of corporate gatekeeping that usually surrounded billionaire CEOs. "Hello, Maya," Robert's voice came through the phone before she had even introduced herself. "I was hoping you would call." Maya felt her breath catch. She had spent hours practicing what she would say, but Robert's immediate recognition and warm tone threw off all her preparation. "How did you know it was me?" she asked. "I gave that card to only one person this week," Robert replied with a chuckle. "And I was quite hopeful that the young woman with such excellent observational skills would be curious enough to research the company before calling." Maya felt herself blushing, even though Robert couldn't see her. "I did research the company," she admitted. "I had no idea who you were when we met." "That's exactly why our meeting was so valuable," Robert said. "You helped me because you saw someone who needed assistance, not because you recognized an opportunity for career advancement. That's becoming increasingly rare in my world." Maya didn't know how to respond to that. She had helped Robert because it seemed like the right thing to do, not because she had been thinking strategically about kindness. The idea that her automatic response to someone in need could be considered professionally valuable was foreign to her understanding of how the business world worked. "I'm not sure I understand what you meant about your company needing someone like me," Maya said finally. "I'm not exactly Silicon Valley material." "Would you be willing to meet me for coffee to discuss that?" Robert asked. "I'd like to tell you more about what I have in mind, but I think that conversation would be better in person." Maya agreed to meet Robert the following Monday at a small cafe near the community college where she worked. She chose the location because it was comfortable and familiar to her. Somewhere she could feel like herself rather than trying to play a role she didn't understand. Robert had suggested several upscale restaurants in downtown San Francisco, but Maya had politely requested somewhere quieter and less formal. The weekend passed slowly as Maya tried to imagine what Robert could possibly want from her. She had read that Nexus Innovations employed some of the most brilliant minds in technology. People with advanced degrees from elite universities and track records of groundbreaking innovations. Maya couldn't figure out how someone with her background and temperament could contribute to that environment. Maya's anxiety about the meeting was compounded by her parents' reaction when she mentioned that she was meeting with a potential employer. They had immediately launched into advice about how to present herself professionally, what questions to ask, and how to negotiate for the best possible offer. Their enthusiasm reminded Maya of why she had been so miserable during her attempt at Stanford, where everyone seemed to approach every interaction as a strategic opportunity. Kevin had been more helpful, reminding Maya that she had valuable skills and insights that she tended to underestimate. He pointed out that her freelance translation work had taught her to understand complex cultural dynamics and communicate across different contexts, abilities that were probably more relevant to a global technology company than she realized. Monday. Morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical San Francisco weather that matched Maya's uncertain mood. She arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early and chose a corner table where she could see the entrance while having her back to the wall. a positioning strategy she had unconsciously developed to manage her social anxiety. Robert arrived exactly on time, wearing the same type of understated clothing he had worn when Maya first met him. She was struck again by how easily he blended into his surroundings, looking like any other middle-aged professional grabbing coffee before work, rather than one of the most powerful people in Silicon Valley. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me," Robert said as he sat down across from Maya. "I hope you don't mind that I took the liberty of ordering for both of us. I remembered that you seemed like someone who might appreciate jasmine tea." Maya was touched by the small gesture of attention and consideration. Robert had indeed ordered jasmine tea for her, along with a selection of pastries that looked like they came from a high-end bakery rather than the cafe's usual offerings. The thoughtfulness of the gesture helped Maya relax slightly, reminding her that Robert had already demonstrated his consideration for others during their first meeting. "I've been thinking about our conversation last week," Robert began, "and I'd like to propose something that might sound unusual. But first, I'd like to understand more about your background and interests." Maya found herself telling Robert about her childhood as a cultural bridge between her immigrant grandmother and American-born family, her disastrous semester at Stanford, and her current work both at the bookstore and as a freelance cultural consultant. She was surprised by how easy it was to talk to Robert, who listened with the same focused attention she had noticed during their first meeting. Robert asked thoughtful questions about Maya's translation work, particularly about how she helped clients navigate cultural differences that went beyond language barriers. He seemed genuinely interested in her perspective on how small misunderstandings could derail important business relationships, and how careful attention to cultural nuances could create opportunities for meaningful connection. "What you're describing," Robert said, after Maya finished explaining a recent project helping a non-profit establish partnerships in Southeast Asia, "is exactly the kind of thinking that Nexus Innovations needs more of. We're expanding into new international markets, and we're discovering that our usual approach to user research isn't capturing the cultural factors that determine whether our products will actually be useful to people in different contexts." Robert explained that Nexus Innovations had built its reputation on products that anticipated user needs better than users could articulate themselves. Their success in American and European markets came from deep research into how people actually behaved in their daily lives rather than just what they said they wanted in surveys and focus groups. But we're finding that our research methods don't translate well to markets where cultural values and social structures are fundamentally different from what we understand, Robert continued. "We've made some expensive mistakes by assuming that what works in Silicon Valley will work everywhere else." Maya listened as Robert described how Nexus Innovations had launched a productivity app in Japan that had failed completely because it was designed around American assumptions about individual achievement and self-promotion. The app encouraged users to share their accomplishments and compete with friends, features that felt inappropriate and uncomfortable to Japanese users who valued group harmony and modest self-presentation. "We had all the technical capabilities to create an excellent product," Robert said, "but we didn't understand the cultural context well enough to design something that people would actually want to use. We needed someone who could help us see our own assumptions and understand how different communities think about productivity, success, and social interaction." Robert's description of the problem resonated deeply with Maya's own experience of feeling misunderstood by systems designed for different personality types and cultural values. She had spent her entire life navigating between different cultural expectations, learning to translate not just languages, but entire ways of thinking about the world. "What I'd like to propose," Robert said, "is a position that doesn't currently exist at Nexus Innovations. I want to hire you as our Director of Cultural Intelligence, someone who would help our product teams understand how cultural differences affect user experience and help our international expansion teams avoid the kind of mistakes we've been making. Maya felt her heart start racing. The title sounded important and intimidating, exactly the kind of high-visibility role that she had always avoided. "I don't have any experience in corporate leadership," she said quickly. "I've never managed people or run departments or anything like that." "You wouldn't be managing people in the traditional sense," Robert explained. "You would be working with our existing teams as a consultant and advisor, helping them ask better questions and consider perspectives they might not think of on their own. The role would involve a lot of observation, research, and one-on-one consultation, which seems much more suited to your strengths than traditional management." Robert outlined a position that sounded almost too good to be true. Maya would have significant autonomy to design her own research methods and work schedule. She would spend time in different international markets, observing how people actually use technology in their daily lives and identifying cultural factors that product teams should consider. She would also work with Nexus Innovations' existing international partners, helping to improve communication and avoid misunderstandings that could damage important relationships. The compensation would be commensurate with the seniority of the role, Robert added, naming a salary that was more than 10 times what Maya currently earned from both her jobs combined, plus equity, comprehensive benefits, and a generous budget for travel and research. Maya stared at Robert in disbelief. The opportunity he was describing addressed everything she had ever wanted in a career. Meaningful work that utilized her cultural understanding, intellectual challenges that didn't require self-promotion, and the chance to help people communicate better across differences that usually divided them. But the scope and visibility of the role terrified her. Maya had built her entire adult life around staying under the radar, avoiding attention and responsibility that might expose her to criticism or failure. The idea of being responsible for major business decisions at a company worth hundreds of billions of dollars felt overwhelming. "Why me?" Maya asked. "You could hire someone with an MBA and international business experience, someone who actually knows how to navigate corporate environments." Robert smiled. "Because people with MBAs and international business experience approach cultural differences as problems to be solved or obstacles to be overcome. You approach them as opportunities to understand and connect. That's a fundamentally different mindset, and it's exactly what we need." Robert explained that he had been looking for someone with Maya's perspective for over 2 years, but that traditional recruiting methods only brought him candidates who thought about culture as a marketing consideration rather than a human reality. He needed someone who understood that successful international expansion required genuine respect for different ways of thinking, not just strategies for overcoming cultural barriers. Maya felt torn between excitement and terror. Everything about Robert's offer aligned with her values and interests, but accepting it would mean stepping into exactly the kind of visible, high-stakes environment that had triggered her anxiety so severely at Stanford. She would be representing Nexus Innovations in international meetings, presenting research to senior executives, and making recommendations that could affect millions of users around the world. "I need time to think about this," Maya said finally. "Of course," Robert replied. "This is a significant decision. Take all the time you need." As Robert prepared to leave, he handed Maya another business card, this one with his personal phone number written on the back. "I want you to know that this offer comes with complete support for your success. If you decide to join Nexus Innovations, I'll make sure you have everything you need to do excellent work, including coaching, training, and whatever accommodations would help you feel comfortable in a corporate environment. Maya walked home from the cafe in a daze, Robert's offer replaying in her mind. For the first time since dropping out of Stanford, she found herself imagining a future that felt both challenging and achievable. Work that would matter without requiring her to become someone she wasn't. Maya spent the next week in a state of suspended animation, going through the motions of her regular routine while her mind churned over Robert's offer. She restocked textbooks with unusual distraction, her hands moving automatically while her thoughts circled endlessly around the impossible decision facing her. The familiar rhythm of her work, which had always provided comfort and stability, now felt like she was sleepwalking through someone else's life. Mrs. Rodriguez noticed the change immediately. Maya, who had never missed a detail or made an inventory error in 8 months of employment, suddenly seemed to exist in a fog of preoccupation. She would start sentences and forget to finish them, lose track of conversations mid-thought, and stare at her computer screen for long minutes without typing anything. "Mija," Mrs. Rodriguez said on Wednesday afternoon as Maya counted the same stack of biology textbooks for the third time. "Whatever's going on in that head of yours must be pretty important. You want to talk about it?" Maya looked up, startled to realize she had been mechanically moving books from one pile to another without any clear purpose. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Rodriguez. I know I've been distracted lately. I'm trying to make a decision about something, and it's bigger than anything I've ever had to decide before." Mrs. Rodriguez set down her clipboard and leaned against the counter with the expression of someone who had raised 4 children and knew when a young person needed guidance. "Big decisions have a way of making everything else feel unreal," she said. "But sometimes when we're so worried about making the wrong choice, we forget to think about what happens if we don't choose at all." That evening, Maya called Kevin and asked if he could come to her apartment. She needed to talk through Robert's offer with someone who understood both her limitations and her potential, someone who wouldn't automatically assume she should take the job just because it paid well or carried an impressive title. Kevin arrived with takeout Thai food and the patient demeanor of someone who had spent years helping his sister navigate anxiety-inducing decisions. He listened without interruption as Maya described her meeting with Robert, the scope of the position he had offered, and her conflicted feelings about whether she was capable of succeeding in such a role. "The work itself sounds perfect for you," Kevin said after Maya finished explaining. "You've been doing cultural consulting for years, just on a smaller scale, and you're already helping people communicate across differences every day at the bookstore. This would just be doing what you're good at in a bigger context." "But the bigger context is the problem," Maya replied. "This isn't helping one non-profit understand Indonesian business customs. This is advising a company that affects millions of people's lives. What if I get it wrong? What if I misunderstand something important and cause Nexus Innovations to make a mistake that hurts people?" Kevin studied his sister's face, recognizing the familiar pattern of her anxiety, spiraling into catastrophic thinking. "Maya, do you remember when you helped me with that presentation about sustainable energy solutions for my engineering class? The one where I was supposed to consider environmental impacts in different geographical regions?" Maya nodded, wondering where Kevin was going with this. "You spent 3 days researching how solar panels would affect communities in rural Bangladesh, not just whether they would work technically, but whether they would fit with local values about community ownership and environmental stewardship. You understood considerations that none of my classmates or even my professor had thought about." Kevin paused to let that sink in before continuing. "That presentation got the highest grade in the class, and my professor said It was because you had helped me think about the human side of engineering solutions. You already do the kind of work Robert is asking you to do. You just do it for people who can't pay you what it's actually worth. Maya felt a flutter of recognition. Her work with Kevin had felt natural and satisfying, exactly the kind of problem-solving that engaged her mind without triggering her social anxiety. She had enjoyed researching how different communities thought about technology adoption and helping Kevin present solutions that respected local values while achieving environmental goals. "But that was helping my brother with a class project," Maya said. "This would be helping a corporation make decisions that affect real markets and real people's livelihoods. And don't you think those real people deserve to have someone who actually cares about their perspectives involved in those decisions?" Kevin asked. "Most companies make international expansion choices based on profit projections and market research. Robert is offering you the chance to make sure that human factors and cultural values are part of the equation too." Kevin's perspective helped Maya realize that she had been thinking about Robert's offer backwards. Instead of focusing on the pressure and responsibility involved, she could think about the opportunity to ensure that important decisions were made with greater understanding and cultural sensitivity. The fear of making mistakes had overshadowed the possibility of preventing much larger mistakes through careful, thoughtful work. That weekend, Maya decided to do what she always did when facing uncertainty. She researched. She spent Saturday morning reading everything she could find about Nexus Innovations' international products and partnerships, looking for patterns in their successes and failures that might help her understand how her skills could contribute to their goals. What she discovered both excited and concerned her. Nexus Innovations had an impressive track record of creating products that genuinely improved people's lives, but their international expansion efforts showed a clear pattern of cultural misunderstandings that had limited their success in several key markets. Maya found case studies of Nexus Innovations products that had failed in specific countries, not because of technical problems, but because they had been designed around cultural assumptions that didn't apply in those contexts. A health monitoring app had been rejected by users in several Latin American countries because it emphasized individual health tracking rather than family-centered wellness approaches. A productivity platform had struggled in Scandinavian markets because it rewarded competitive behaviors that conflicted with cultural values about work-life balance and collective achievement. Reading about these failures, Maya began to see how her perspective could be valuable. She understood intuitively that successful technology needed to fit into people's existing social structures and cultural values, rather than trying to change them. Her experience as a cultural bridge had taught her to look for ways to honor different approaches to life, rather than assuming one approach was universally superior. Maya also researched Robert Chen's background more thoroughly, looking for clues about what kind of leader he would be and whether his commitment to cultural sensitivity was genuine or just good public relations. What she found reassured her about his character while also helping her understand why he had approached her in the way he had. Robert had grown up as the son of immigrants from Hong Kong, and his early experiences navigating between Chinese and American cultural expectations had shaped his approach to business leadership. Unlike many tech executives who had succeeded by conforming to Silicon Valley's aggressive, self-promotional culture, Robert had built his company around the principle that diverse perspectives led to better solutions. Nexus Innovations was known for having one of the most inclusive workplace cultures in tech, with employee satisfaction ratings that consistently ranked among the highest in the industry. The company had been profitable every year since its founding, but Robert had deliberately chosen sustainable growth over the rapid scaling that characterized most successful startups. Maya found interviews where Robert talked about his belief that business success should be measured not just by financial returns, but by positive impact on employees, customers, and communities. He had implemented policies at Nexus Innovations that prioritized long-term thinking over quarterly earnings, employee well-being over productivity metrics, and product quality over market dominance. Reading about Robert's leadership philosophy, Maya began to understand why he had recognized something valuable in her approach to helping him cross the street. He wasn't just looking for someone with cultural expertise. He was looking for someone who approached problems with the same human-centered values that had guided his own business decisions. On Sunday evening, Maya made another call to Robert's personal number. She had decided that she needed to understand more about the practical aspects of the role before she could make a final decision, particularly how he envisioned her working within Nexus Innovations' existing corporate structure. "Maya," Robert said warmly when he answered, "I hope you've had time to think about our conversation." "I have," Maya replied, "and I have some questions about how this position would actually work day to day. I'm interested in the work itself, but I'm still concerned about whether I'm the right person for a corporate environment." Robert invited Maya to visit Nexus Innovations headquarters the following Tuesday, offering to give her a tour of the facilities and introduce her to some of the team members she would be working with. "I think seeing the environment and meeting the people might help you get a better sense of whether this feels like a place where you could do your best work," he said. Maya agreed to the visit, though she spent Monday night researching appropriate business attire and worrying about making a good impression on people who would be evaluating her professional credibility. The familiar anxiety about not fitting in began to creep back, reminding her of all the reasons she had retreated from competitive academic and professional environments. Tuesday morning, Maya took the train to Nexus Innovations headquarters in South Bay, a sleek campus that managed to feel welcoming rather than intimidating, despite its obvious expense and technological sophistication. The buildings were designed around natural light and green spaces, creating an atmosphere that felt more like a university than the sterile corporate offices Maya had imagined. Robert met Maya in the lobby, which featured comfortable seating areas, where employees were having informal meetings and working on laptops. The space buzzed with productive energy, but it felt collaborative rather than competitive, more like a library or co-working space than the high-pressure environment Maya had expected. "Welcome to Nexus," Robert said as he led Maya toward the elevators. "I thought we'd start by meeting Dr. Sarah Kim, who heads our User Experience Research Division. She's been advocating for someone with your background for over a year." Dr. Kim turned out to be a soft-spoken woman in her 40s who had immigrated from South Korea as a graduate student and built her career around understanding how cultural differences affected technology adoption. She greeted Maya with genuine enthusiasm and immediately began explaining the challenges her team faced when trying to conduct user research in international markets. "We're excellent at understanding user behavior in contexts we're familiar with," Dr. Kim explained as she showed Maya through the UX research lab. "But when we try to apply the same methods in different cultural contexts, we often end up with data that's misleading or incomplete. We need someone who can help us ask better questions and interpret our findings more accurately." Dr. Kim showed Maya examples of research projects that had failed to capture important cultural factors, like a study of mobile banking usage in rural India that had completely missed how gender roles affected women's access to financial technology. The research had focused on technical usability without considering social factors that determined whether women could actually use the products being tested. "This is exactly the kind of insight we need more of," Dr. Kim said, showing Maya a revised study design that incorporated cultural considerations. But we need someone who can help us think about these factors from the beginning of our research process, not just when we're trying to figure out why our products aren't working in certain markets. Maya found herself asking thoughtful questions about Dr. Kim's research methods and offering suggestions based on her own experience with cultural consulting. The conversation felt natural and engaging, more like an academic discussion between colleagues than a job interview. Dr. Kim's enthusiasm for Maya's perspective was evident and encouraging. Next, Robert introduced Maya to James Walsh, the director of international partnerships, who had been struggling with communication challenges that went beyond language barriers. James described a recent partnership negotiation in Southeast Asia that had nearly failed because Nexus Innovations' legal team had insisted on contract terms that were technically favorable but culturally inappropriate for their potential partners. We almost lost a deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars because we didn't understand that our insistence on certain liability clauses made us look like we didn't trust our partners, James explained. It wasn't about the actual legal implications. It was about what our demands communicated about our attitude toward the relationship. James had eventually salvaged the partnership by hiring a cultural consultant who helped renegotiate the contract terms in a way that achieved the same legal protections while respecting local business customs. But the experience had convinced him that Nexus Innovations needed someone with cultural expertise involved in international business development from the beginning. Having you as part of our team would mean we could avoid these kinds of misunderstandings before they threaten important relationships, James said. And it would help us build partnerships that are genuinely collaborative rather than just profitable. Maya's final meeting was with Lisa Chen, no relation to Robert, who headed Nexus Innovations' employee experience team. Lisa had been instrumental in creating the inclusive workplace culture that the company was known for, and she was interested in how Maya's cultural perspective could help them improve their international hiring and retention efforts. We've been successful at creating an inclusive environment for our employees in the United States, Lisa explained, but we're learning that what feels inclusive to American employees doesn't necessarily feel welcoming to people from different cultural backgrounds. We need someone who can help us understand how to extend our values in ways that respect different cultural approaches to work and career development. Lisa showed Maya data about employee satisfaction and retention rates across different cultural groups, highlighting patterns that suggested room for improvement in how Nexus Innovations supported employees from non-Western backgrounds. Maya found the data fascinating and immediately began thinking about research approaches that could help identify specific areas for improvement. By the end of her visit, Maya felt both excited and overwhelmed. Every person she had met had expressed genuine enthusiasm for her potential contributions, and the work itself aligned perfectly with her interests and values. But she also realized that accepting Robert's offer would mean stepping into a level of professional responsibility that would fundamentally change her life in ways she couldn't fully predict. Robert walked Maya back to the lobby, giving her space to process what she had experienced during her visit. "What questions do you have after meeting the team?" he asked as they reached the exit. "Everyone seems genuinely excited about this work," Maya said slowly. "And the problems you're trying to solve are exactly the kind of thing I care about. But I'm still worried about whether I can handle the pressure and visibility that would come with this role." Robert nodded thoughtfully. "What if I told you that the most valuable thing you could bring to this position is exactly the thoughtfulness and careful consideration you're showing right now? The fact that you're thinking seriously about the responsibility involved tells me you're the right person for this work." Maya accepted Robert's offer on a Thursday afternoon in late November, exactly 2 weeks after her visit to Nexus Innovations headquarters. She had spent those 14 days in a state of careful deliberation that drove her parents to distraction and impressed Robert with its thoroughness. Maya had researched everything from the company's financial stability to employee reviews on anonymous platforms, creating detailed notes about potential challenges and opportunities that would come with the position. Her decision ultimately came down to a conversation with her grandmother, who had listened to Maya's anxieties about professional visibility and corporate responsibility with the patient wisdom of someone who had navigated much more difficult transitions in her own life. "You are afraid of failing where people can see," her grandmother had said in Mandarin, "but you are already failing if you hide your gifts from the world." Maya's first day at Nexus Innovations was scheduled for the Monday after Thanksgiving, giving her time to transition away from her bookstore job and prepare mentally for the dramatic change in her professional circumstances. Mrs. Rodriguez had been disappointed to lose Maya, but proud of her decision to pursue something more challenging, insisting on throwing a small farewell party that made Maya cry with gratitude for the kindness she had experienced during her months of retail work. Chapter. Weekend before starting her new position, Maya had experienced the familiar anxiety spiral that accompanied any major change in her routine. She had reorganized her apartment twice, researched business casual attire until she could write a dissertation on appropriate fabrics and hemlines, and practiced introducing herself in the mirror until the words sounded natural rather than terrified. Kevin had spent Saturday evening helping Maya prepare for her first week, running through potential scenarios and reminding her that she had been hired specifically for her perspective, rather than her ability to conform to corporate expectations. "Robert didn't offer you this job because he wanted you to become someone else," Kevin had said. "He offered it because he wanted you to be exactly who you are, just in a different context." Maya's first morning at Nexus Innovations began with a comprehensive orientation program that Robert had personally designed to help her transition into the corporate environment gradually. Instead of throwing her into high-stakes meetings immediately, he had structured her first month around observation, research, and one-on-one conversations that would allow her to understand the company's culture and processes before taking on major responsibilities. Maya's office was located in a quiet corner of the User Experience Research Division, with windows overlooking a courtyard garden and enough space for the kind of detailed work that required sustained concentration. Robert had consulted with workplace psychology experts to create an environment that would accommodate Maya's need for minimal distractions and maximum autonomy over her schedule and working methods. The office came equipped with a standing desk that could be adjusted to different heights, noise-cancelling headphones for when she needed complete focus, and a small meeting area where she could conduct intimate conversations without the intimidation factor of formal conference rooms. Maya had been touched to discover that Robert had also arranged for a selection of teas from around the world, remembering her preference for jasmine tea from their first coffee meeting. Maya's initial weeks at Nexus Innovations exceeded her most optimistic expectations, while also presenting challenges she hadn't anticipated. The work itself was engaging and meaningful, exactly the kind of problem-solving that energized rather than exhausted her. She spent her days reading user research reports from international markets, identifying cultural assumptions that might be affecting the validity of the data, and developing frameworks for more culturally sensitive research approaches. Dr. Sarah Kim had become an invaluable mentor, helping Maya understand how academic research methods could be adapted for corporate contexts while maintaining rigorous standards for cultural accuracy. Maya found that her background in freelance consulting had prepared her well for the collaborative aspects of the role, as she was comfortable working with different teams as an advisor rather than trying to manage people directly. Maya's first major project involved analyzing user research from Nexus Innovations' expansion into the Vietnamese market, where a productivity app had failed to gain traction despite positive technical reviews. Maya spent 3 weeks conducting virtual interviews with Vietnamese users, researching cultural attitudes toward productivity and time management, and identifying specific design elements that felt inappropriate or uncomfortable to the target audience. Her findings revealed that the app's emphasis on individual goal setting and personal achievement conflicted with Vietnamese cultural values that prioritized collective harmony and family-centered decision-making. The app encouraged users to set ambitious personal targets and share their accomplishments publicly, features that felt boastful and inappropriate to people from a culture that valued modesty and group cohesion. Maya's recommendations went beyond simple interface changes to suggest fundamental shifts in how the app conceptualized productivity and success. Instead of focusing on individual achievement, she proposed features that would help users contribute to family and community goals. Rather than encouraging competition between friends, she suggested collaboration tools that would allow users to support each other's objectives without creating social pressure or uncomfortable comparisons. Dr. Kim was impressed not just by Maya's cultural insights, but by her ability to translate those insights into specific, actionable recommendations that the product development team could implement. "Most cultural consultants tell us what's wrong with our approach," Dr. Kim told Robert during Maya's first monthly review, "but Maya shows us how to fix it in ways that actually improve the product for everyone." Maya's second major challenge came when James Walsh asked her to participate in partnership negotiations with a potential distributor in South Korea. The previous negotiations had stalled over contract terms that both sides considered important, but approached from fundamentally different perspectives about business relationships and legal obligations. Maya spent a week preparing for the meetings by researching Korean business culture, studying the specific concerns that had emerged during previous negotiations, and developing strategies for reframing the discussion in ways that would address both parties' underlying needs rather than just their stated positions. The negotiations took place over video conference, with Maya serving as a cultural interpreter, who helped both sides understand the reasoning behind each other's requests. When the Korean partners expressed concerns about certain liability clauses, Maya helped the Nexus legal team understand that the objections weren't about avoiding responsibility, but about how the language of the contract implied mistrust and adversarial assumptions about the business relationship. Maya suggested alternative contract language that achieved the same legal protections while framing the partnership as a collaborative relationship based on mutual respect and shared objectives. The Korean partners responded positively to the revised approach, and the deal was finalized within 2 weeks of Maya's involvement. "Maya didn't just help us close a deal," James reported to Robert. "She helped us build a relationship that's going to be much more productive long-term because both sides feel understood and respected." Maya's success with these early projects established her credibility within Nexus Innovations, while also revealing an unexpected challenge. Her work was so effective that demand for her expertise quickly exceeded her capacity to provide detailed consultation to every team that wanted her input. Robert recognized that Maya's impact could be multiplied if she could train other employees to think more culturally when approaching international projects, but this would require Maya to step into a teaching role that felt uncomfortably visible and performance-oriented. Maya had never enjoyed being the center of attention, and the idea of conducting training sessions for groups of colleagues triggered the same anxiety that had made her abandon her Stanford computer science program. The solution came from an unexpected source. Chen, the employee experience director, suggested that Maya could share her expertise through written resources and small group consultations rather than formal presentations to large audiences. Lisa had noticed that Maya was most effective when working one-on-one or with small teams, and she proposed developing a cultural competency program that would leverage Maya's strengths while accommodating her communication preferences. Maya spent several weeks developing a comprehensive cultural intelligence toolkit that included research frameworks, question templates, and case studies that other employees could use to incorporate cultural considerations into their own work. Instead of requiring Maya to conduct formal training sessions, the program was structured around small group workshops where Maya could facilitate discussions and answer questions in a more intimate setting. The Cultural Intelligence Toolkit became one of the most popular internal resources at Nexus Innovations, with employees from multiple divisions requesting access to Maya's frameworks and guidance. Maya found that she enjoyed the teaching aspects of her role when they were structured around practical problem-solving rather than formal presentations, and she began to develop confidence in her ability to share knowledge without having to perform or sell herself. Maya's growing reputation within Nexus Innovations brought opportunities that both excited and intimidated her. Robert began inviting her to senior leadership meetings, where her cultural insights could inform strategic decisions about international expansion and product development. Maya found these meetings challenging but manageable when she focused on her role as an expert consultant rather than trying to participate in the competitive dynamics that characterized some corporate environments. Maya's presence in leadership meetings had an unexpected effect on the dynamics of those discussions. Her habit of asking thoughtful questions about cultural implications and user impact encouraged other participants to slow down and consider factors they might have overlooked in their eagerness to move quickly on business opportunities. Maya has a way of asking questions that make everyone else think more carefully, Robert observed during a conversation with Dr. Kim. She doesn't challenge ideas aggressively, but she helps us see blind spots that could have led to expensive mistakes. Maya's influence extended beyond specific projects to affect how Nexus Innovations approached international business development more broadly. Her success in identifying cultural factors that traditional market research had missed led to new protocols for evaluating international opportunities and new standards for cultural competency in product development. 6 months into her role, Maya received an invitation that would test her comfort with professional visibility in a new way. She was asked to represent Nexus Innovations at an international conference on technology and cultural diversity, where she would present a paper about culturally sensitive user research methods. The invitation both honored her expertise and terrified her with its implications. Maya would be speaking to an audience of academics, industry professionals, and government officials about work that she had developed at Nexus Innovations, representing the company as a thought leader in an area that was becoming increasingly important to technology companies around the world. Maya's initial instinct was to decline the invitation, explaining that public speaking remained one of her greatest professional challenges. But Robert suggested an alternative approach that would allow Maya to share her insights without requiring her to deliver a traditional conference presentation. Instead of a solo presentation, Maya would participate in a panel discussion with other experts in cultural intelligence and international user research. The format would allow her to contribute her perspective through conversation and questions rather than formal presentation, playing to her strengths as a thoughtful discussant rather than requiring her to be a commanding speaker. Maya agreed to participate in the panel, recognizing that sharing her work publicly could help other companies avoid the cultural mistakes that had inspired her role at Nexus Innovations. She spent weeks preparing for the conference by researching the other panelists' work and developing talking points that would allow her to contribute meaningfully to the discussion without feeling pressure to dominate the conversation. The conference was scheduled for early spring, giving Maya several months to prepare while continuing to develop her expertise through ongoing projects at Nexus Innovations. Maya found that having a specific deadline and public commitment helped her push past some of her comfort zone limitations while still working within her natural communication style. Maya's preparation for the conference also led to deeper conversations with Robert about her long-term career development and the possibility of expanding her role within Nexus Innovations. Robert had been impressed by Maya's impact during her first months with the company, and he was beginning to envision ways that her cultural intelligence work could become a competitive advantage for Nexus Innovations in international markets. "You've proven that cultural competency isn't just nice to have," Robert told Maya during one of their regular check-in meetings. "It's essential for success in global markets, and you've developed approaches that could revolutionize how technology companies think about international expansion." Robert's vision for Maya's future at Nexus Innovations included the possibility of building a cultural intelligence division that would serve both internal teams and external clients, positioning the company as a leader in culturally sensitive technology development. Maya found the idea both thrilling and overwhelming, representing a level of professional responsibility and visibility that she had never imagined for herself. Maya realized that her journey from invisible bookstore employee to recognized expert in cultural intelligence had happened so gradually that she hadn't fully processed the magnitude of the transformation. She was no longer the anxious college dropout who couldn't speak up in class. She had become someone whose insights were valued by one of the most successful companies in technology. The change hadn't required Maya to become more aggressive or self-promotional. Instead, it had happened because she had found an environment where her natural strengths were recognized and supported. Robert's leadership style and Nexus Innovations culture had allowed Maya to contribute her best work without forcing her to adopt personality traits that felt inauthentic or uncomfortable. Maya's success at Nexus Innovations had not gone unnoticed beyond the company's walls. By spring of her first year, her work had begun attracting attention from competitors, industry analysts, and headhunters who saw cultural intelligence as the next frontier in technology consulting. What Maya didn't realize was that her growing reputation was also creating resentment among people who felt threatened by her rapid rise from obscurity to influence. The threat emerged from an unexpected source. Victoria Sterling, Nexus Innovations, former Director of International Strategy, who had been quietly building a case against Maya's qualifications and influence within the company. Victoria had been with Nexus for 8 years, gradually working her way up from junior analyst to senior leadership through aggressive networking, strategic self-promotion, and careful cultivation of relationships with board members and investors. Victoria had expected to be promoted to Vice President of Global Expansion when Robert announced the creation of new leadership roles focused on international growth. Instead, she had watched Robert hire Maya for a position that seemed to overlap significantly with Victoria's own expertise, while Maya received immediate access to senior leadership meetings and strategic decisions that Victoria had spent years working toward. Victoria's background was impressive by traditional corporate standards, MBA from Wharton, 5 years at McKinsey before joining Nexus, fluency in 3 languages, and a track record of successful international business development. Deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. She had built her career around understanding global markets, competitive analysis, and strategic planning for international expansion. What Victoria couldn't understand was how someone with Maya's limited formal credentials could be elevated so quickly to a position of such influence. Maya had no advanced degree, no experience at major consulting firms, no track record of managing large-scale business initiatives. From Victoria's perspective, Maya's rapid ascent represented everything wrong with Silicon Valley's tendency to prioritize innovation over experience, potential over proven performance. Victoria had initially tried to establish a collaborative relationship with Maya, suggesting that their roles could be complementary rather than competitive. But Maya's cultural intelligence work had begun influencing strategic decisions that Victoria considered her domain, particularly around market selection, partnership evaluation, and product positioning for international launches. The tension came to a head during a senior leadership meeting in March, where Maya presented research about potential expansion into Southeast Asian markets. Maya's analysis suggested that several countries Victoria had identified as high-priority targets actually presented significant cultural barriers that traditional market research had failed to capture. Maya's presentation was characteristically thoughtful and well-researched, focusing on specific cultural factors that could affect user adoption and partnership success in different countries. She recommended a more gradual approach to expansion, with extensive cultural research and local partnership development preceding any major product launches. Victoria saw Maya's recommendations as directly contradicting months of her own strategic planning and market analysis. After Maya's presentation, Victoria requested a private meeting with Robert to express her concerns about the direction of the company's international strategy. "I respect Maya's cultural insights," Victoria told Robert, "but I'm concerned that we're letting cultural considerations override hard business data. The markets Maya is suggesting we avoid represent billions of dollars in potential revenue, and the competitive landscape won't wait for us to conduct anthropological studies." Victoria argued that Nexus Innovations was in danger of becoming paralyzed by over-analysis, that Maya's cultural research was valuable but should inform tactical decisions rather than driving strategic ones. She suggested that Maya's role should focus on implementation support rather than high-level strategy development. Robert listened to Victoria's concerns with his characteristic patience, but Maya's track record of preventing costly cultural mistakes had convinced him that cultural intelligence needed to be central to strategic planning rather than an afterthought. "Victoria, I appreciate your expertise in market analysis," Robert replied, "but Maya has already saved us from several expensive mistakes that traditional research methods didn't identify." Victoria left the meeting feeling frustrated and undervalued, convinced that Robert was making a strategic error by prioritizing cultural considerations over market opportunities. She began documenting what she saw as problematic patterns in Maya's influence, preparing a case that Maya's lack of traditional business credentials was leading to overly cautious decision-making that could cost Nexus Innovations its competitive advantage. Maya remained unaware of Victoria's growing antagonism, focused on her preparation for the upcoming conference presentation and several major projects that were demanding her attention. Maya's work style had always been internally focused, concentrating on the quality of her research and analysis rather than office politics or interpersonal dynamics. Maya's obliviousness to corporate intrigue was both a strength and a vulnerability. It allowed her to maintain the authenticity and thoughtfulness that made her work valuable, but it also left her unprepared for the kind of professional sabotage that Victoria was beginning to orchestrate. Victoria's strategy was sophisticated and patient, designed to undermine Maya's credibility gradually rather than through direct confrontation. She began raising questions about Maya's recommendations in senior meetings, not challenging them outright but suggesting alternative interpretations of the data and highlighting potential risks of moving too slowly in competitive markets. Victoria also began building alliances with other executives who felt that Nexus Innovations was becoming too cautious in its international expansion efforts. She found receptive audiences among sales leaders who were eager to pursue large deals in emerging markets and product managers who felt that extensive cultural research was slowing down development timelines. The most damaging aspect of Victoria's campaign was her subtle questioning of Maya's qualifications and experience. Victoria never criticized Maya directly, but she began making comments in meetings about the importance of traditional business training, the value of proven experience in international markets, and the risks of relying too heavily on theoretical frameworks rather than practical business knowledge. "I think Maya's cultural insights are valuable," Victoria would say in meetings where Maya wasn't present, "but I worry that we're not balancing them with hard business realities. Cultural sensitivity is important, but so is competitive positioning and market timing." Victoria's comments were carefully calibrated to sound reasonable and balanced while planting seeds of doubt about Maya's business judgment. She positioned herself as the voice of practical experience, someone who appreciated Maya's contributions but worried about their implications for Nexus Innovations' competitive position. Maya first became aware that something was wrong during a project meeting with the Southeast Asia expansion team. Several team members seemed unusually hesitant to engage with her cultural research, asking pointed questions about the business implications of her recommendations and expressing concerns about whether cultural considerations were outweighing market opportunities. Maya had always been sensitive to social dynamics, and she noticed immediately that the tone of the meeting felt different from previous collaborations. People who had previously been enthusiastic about her insights now seemed skeptical and guarded, as if they had been instructed to question her conclusions more aggressively. After the meeting, Maya approached Dr. Sarah Kim to ask whether she had noticed any changes in how other teams were responding to cultural intelligence recommendations. Dr. Kim confirmed Maya's suspicions, explaining that she had heard concerns being raised about whether Maya's research was making Nexus Innovations too risk-averse in international markets. "I think someone has been questioning whether cultural research should have as much influence on strategic decisions," Dr. Kim told Maya carefully. "There seems to be a growing sentiment that we're overthinking cultural factors at the expense of business opportunities." Maya felt a familiar knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. The criticism echoed her deepest fears about her own qualifications and value within a corporate environment. Maya had always worried that her lack of traditional business credentials would eventually be used against her, and it seemed that moment had arrived. Maya's first instinct was to retreat, to minimize her involvement in high-stakes decisions and focus on less visible research projects that wouldn't attract criticism. But Dr. Kim encouraged Maya to speak directly with Robert about the concerns she was hearing, rather than assuming that the criticism represented a broader shift in company priorities. Maya requested a meeting with Robert, something she had never done before when facing professional challenges. Her previous approach to workplace conflict had always been avoidance and accommodation, but Dr. Kim had helped her understand that Maya's work was too important to be undermined by office politics. Robert listened carefully as Maya described the changed atmosphere she had noticed in recent meetings and the concerns that had been raised about her influence on strategic decisions. Maya was careful not to name Victoria specifically, focusing instead on the pattern of criticism she had observed. "Maya," Robert said, after she finished explaining her concerns, "you need to understand that your work represents a fundamental challenge to how some people think about business strategy. Not everyone is comfortable with the idea that cultural factors should have equal weight with financial projections and market analysis." Robert explained that Maya's success had inevitably created resistance among people who felt threatened by new approaches to international business development. "Some of the criticism you're hearing isn't really about your qualifications or the quality of your work," Robert continued. "It's about people feeling that their own expertise is being devalued by the emphasis we're placing on cultural intelligence." Robert assured Maya that her work remained central to Nexus Innovations' international strategy, but he also warned her that she needed to be prepared for continued resistance from people who preferred traditional approaches to global expansion. "The challenge," Robert said, "is proving that cultural intelligence isn't just an interesting academic exercise, but a practical business necessity." Maya left the meeting with Robert feeling both reassured and apprehensive. She understood that her position within Nexus Innovations was secure as long as Robert supported her work. But she also realized that she needed to develop strategies for defending her contributions against criticism that was likely to continue. Maya's preparation for the international conference took on new urgency as she realized that her public presentation would serve not just as professional development, but as validation of her expertise in front of industry peers. If Maya could demonstrate the business value of cultural intelligence to a broader audience, it might help legitimize her approach within Nexus Innovations. The conference was scheduled for late April in Singapore, bringing together technology leaders, academics, and government officials to discuss the intersection of culture and technology in global markets. Maya's panel would focus specifically on user research methods that incorporated cultural considerations, with case studies from companies that had successfully adapted their approaches for international markets. Maya spent weeks preparing for the conference by developing a presentation that would demonstrate the concrete business value of cultural intelligence without revealing proprietary information about Nexus Innovations strategies. She focused on general principles and anonymized case studies that illustrated how cultural research had prevented costly mistakes and improved product adoption in international markets. Maya's preparation was complicated by Victoria's escalating efforts to undermine her credibility within Nexus Innovations. Victoria had begun questioning Maya's recommendations more directly in senior meetings, suggesting that cultural considerations were causing Nexus to miss important market opportunities, while competitors moved more aggressively into emerging markets. Victoria's criticism reached a crescendo during a board presentation where Maya recommended postponing a major product launch in Indonesia until additional cultural research could be completed. Maya's research had identified significant concerns about how the product's social features would be received in a culture that valued privacy and family hierarchy. But Victoria argued that further delays would allow competitors to establish market dominance. "I think we need to balance cultural sensitivity with business pragmatism," Victoria said during the board meeting. "While Maya's research is thorough, I'm concerned that we're allowing perfectionism to prevent us from pursuing profitable opportunities." Victoria presented alternative data suggesting that Nexus Innovations was falling behind competitors in several key markets where cultural considerations had led to delayed or modified product launches. She argued that the company needed to move more decisively, using cultural research to inform implementation rather than determine strategy. The board discussion that followed revealed a fundamental divide about the role cultural intelligence should play in business strategy. Some board members appreciated Maya's cautious approach and supported Robert's emphasis on cultural competency, while others shared Victoria's concerns about competitive positioning and market timing. Maya sat in the back of the boardroom during this discussion, watching Victoria present a compelling case against everything Maya had been hired to accomplish. Victoria's arguments were sophisticated and data-driven, appealing to board members' concerns about shareholder value and competitive advantage. For the first time since joining Nexus Innovations, Maya began to doubt whether her approach to cultural intelligence was compatible with the realities of corporate decision-making. Victoria's criticism wasn't unfair or inaccurate. There were legitimate trade-offs between cultural sensitivity and business aggressiveness, and Maya's recommendations did sometimes conflict with short-term profit maximization. Maya realized that her upcoming conference presentation would serve as more than professional development. It would be her opportunity to demonstrate that cultural intelligence was a business advantage rather than a constraint. If Maya could articulate the long-term value of culturally sensitive business practices, she might be able to counter Victoria's arguments and secure her position within Nexus Innovations. The stakes of the conference had become much higher than Maya had originally understood, transforming from a career development opportunity into a test of whether cultural intelligence could be accepted as a legitimate business discipline worthy of strategic influence. The Singapore conference arrived, with the weight of Maya's entire career hanging in the balance. She had spent the week before her departure in a state of focused preparation that bordered on obsession, reviewing every detail of her research, practicing her talking points, and preparing for the kinds of challenging questions that Victoria's criticism had taught her to expect. Maya's panel was scheduled for the conference's second day, titled Cultural Intelligence as Competitive Advantage, Moving Beyond Translation to Transformation. The other panelists included Dr. Rajesh Patel, a Harvard Business School professor who had written extensively about cross-cultural management, and Elena Volkov, who headed international expansion for a European fintech company that had successfully entered 12 new markets in 3 years. Maya had arrived in Singapore 2 days early to acclimate to the time zone and observe other conference sessions, hoping to understand the audience's perspective and adjust her contribution accordingly. What she discovered at the conference both encouraged and intimidated her. There was genuine hunger among technology leaders for practical approaches to cultural challenges, but also deep skepticism about whether cultural considerations could be balanced with competitive business realities. The morning of Maya's panel, she received an unexpected message from Dr. Kim, who was following the conference remotely from Nexus Innovations headquarters. Maya, the message read, Victoria presented an alternative framework for international expansion to the executive team yesterday. She's recommending that cultural research be limited to post-launch optimization rather than pre-launch strategy. Your presentation today could determine whether her approach gets adopted. Maya felt her stomach drop as she realized that Victoria had timed her internal proposal to coincide with Maya's absence from the company. While Maya was in Singapore trying to prove the value of cultural intelligence to the broader industry, Victoria was at Nexus Innovations, arguing that Maya's approach was too cautious for competitive markets. Maya's preparation for the panel discussion took on desperate urgency as she understood that her career at Nexus Innovations might depend on her ability to articulate the business case for cultural intelligence convincingly enough to influence people she had never met. The panel wasn't just about professional development anymore. It was about proving that her entire approach to international business development deserved to exist. The panel began with Dr. Patel presenting academic research about the financial costs of cultural misunderstandings in international business, citing studies that estimated companies lost billions of dollars annually through avoidable cultural mistakes. His presentation was thorough and convincing, but Maya could see that the audience was waiting for practical examples rather than theoretical frameworks. Elena Volkov followed with a case study about her company's expansion into Southeast Asian markets, explaining how cultural research had helped them design financial products that aligned with local values about family economics and community lending. Her presentation was impressive, but Maya noticed that Elena's examples focused on tactical adaptations rather than strategic decision-making. When Maya's turn came, she felt the familiar flutter of anxiety that accompanied public speaking, but also a clarity of purpose that surprised her. She began by sharing an anonymized version of the Indonesian market research that had sparked Victoria's most recent criticism, explaining how cultural analysis had revealed potential problems that traditional market research had missed. We discovered that our product's social sharing features, which had been hugely successful in Western markets, would likely fail in Indonesia because they conflicted with cultural values about privacy and hierarchy, Maya explained to the panel audience. Traditional market research had indicated strong demand for social productivity tools, but cultural analysis revealed that the specific social dynamics our product encouraged would feel inappropriate and uncomfortable to Indonesian users. Maya continued by explaining how this cultural insight had led to a redesigned product that better aligned with local social structures, resulting in user adoption rates that exceeded projections when the modified version was eventually launched. The case study demonstrated that cultural considerations had improved rather than constrained business outcomes. Dr. Patel asked Maya a question that cut directly to the heart of Victoria's criticism. How do you balance cultural sensitivity with competitive timing? Doesn't extensive cultural research slow down decision-making in ways that allow competitors to gain market advantages? Maya had anticipated this question and prepared an answer that addressed Victoria's concerns directly. Cultural research doesn't have to slow down decision-making if it's integrated into strategic planning from the beginning, rather than treated as an afterthought, Maya replied. The companies that struggle with timing are usually the ones that try to add cultural considerations to strategies that were developed without cultural input. Maya explained that Nexus Innovations had actually accelerated their international expansion timeline by avoiding costly mistakes that would have required product recalls, partnership renegotiations, and reputation management. When you factor in the time and resources required to recover from cultural missteps, upfront cultural research is actually more efficient than reactive problem-solving. Elena Volkov supported Maya's argument with her own experience, explaining how her company had initially tried to expand rapidly without cultural research and had been forced to withdraw from 3 markets after expensive failures. We learned that moving fast without cultural understanding is actually much slower than moving thoughtfully with cultural preparation, Elena said. The panel discussion continued for another 40 minutes, with Maya fielding increasingly sophisticated questions about implementation methods, measurement frameworks, and integration with traditional business planning processes. Maya found herself speaking with confidence and authority that surprised her, drawing on months of practical experience at Nexus Innovations to provide detailed, actionable answers. During the question and answer session, a venture capitalist in the audience asked Maya about the return on investment for cultural intelligence initiatives, wanting to understand how companies could measure the business value of cultural research. Maya's answer demonstrated the analytical rigor that Robert had recognized during their first meeting, We track several metrics, Maya explained, including time to market for international launches, user adoption rates in new markets, partnership, success rates, and the cost of post-launch modifications. Companies with integrated cultural intelligence show consistently better performance across all these measures. Maya provided specific data points that illustrated the business case for cultural research, showing how Nexus Innovations' culturally informed approach had resulted in measurably better outcomes than industry averages for international expansion. Her presentation demonstrated that cultural intelligence wasn't just morally important, but financially advantageous. The panel concluded with enthusiastic applause and several audience members approaching Maya with questions about how they could implement similar approaches at their own companies. Maya exchanged contact information with executives from major technology companies who wanted to learn more about cultural intelligence frameworks and implementation strategies. Maya's most significant conversation came with Dr. James Liu, a senior executive at a major consulting firm who had been taking detailed notes throughout the panel discussion. Dr. Liu explained that his company was developing a new practice area focused on cultural competency for international business development, and he was impressed by Maya's practical approach to complex cultural challenges. Your framework for integrating cultural research with strategic planning could revolutionize how consulting firms approach international expansion projects, Dr. Liu told Maya. Would you be interested in discussing opportunities to collaborate, or perhaps join our team as a practice leader? Maya was flattered by Dr. Liu's offer, but explained that she was committed to her work at Nexus Innovations. However, the conversation reinforced her understanding that cultural intelligence was becoming recognized as a legitimate business discipline with significant market value. That evening, Maya received a call from Robert, who had been following reactions to her panel presentation through social media and industry publications. Maya, Robert said, your presentation is being discussed across LinkedIn and Twitter. People are calling it one of the most practical and insightful sessions of the entire conference. Robert explained that Maya's conference presentation had generated immediate interest from potential partners and clients who wanted to understand how Nexus Innovations approached cultural intelligence. You've positioned our company as a thought leader in an area that's becoming increasingly important to the entire technology industry, Robert said. More importantly, Robert told Maya that her presentation had provided him with the evidence he needed to counter Victoria's criticism within Nexus Innovations. The board is now asking me to expand our cultural intelligence capabilities rather than limiting them, Robert said. Your conference presentation demonstrated that our approach is not just internally valuable, but represents a competitive advantage that other companies want to learn from. Maya flew back to San Francisco with a sense of vindication that was entirely new to her professional experience. For the first time in her career, she had not only defended her work successfully, but had established herself as a recognized expert whose insights were valued by industry leaders beyond her own company. Maya's return to Nexus Innovations was marked by a level of internal recognition that felt almost overwhelming. Colleagues who had previously been skeptical of cultural intelligence were now asking Maya for guidance on their own international projects. The conference presentation had legitimized her expertise in ways that internal success alone had not accomplished. Victoria's response to Maya's conference success was predictably hostile, but her criticism now carried less weight within Nexus Innovations. Victoria continued to argue for more aggressive international expansion strategies, but the board's interest in cultural intelligence had shifted the conversation in Maya's favor. During Maya's first week back from Singapore, Robert called a senior leadership meeting to discuss expanding Nexus Innovations' cultural intelligence capabilities based on the external interest Maya's presentation had generated. Victoria attended the meeting but said little, clearly recognizing that the momentum had shifted against her preferred approach. Maya's conference presentation has generated inquiries from companies that want to license our cultural intelligence frameworks, Robert announced. We're now being approached as consultants by competitors who want to understand how we achieve such high success rates in international markets. Robert proposed creating a cultural intelligence center of excellence within Nexus Innovations, with Maya as its director and the authority to hire additional researchers and consultants. The new center would serve both internal teams and external clients, positioning Nexus Innovations as the leading provider of cultural intelligence services for technology companies. Maya felt simultaneously thrilled and terrified by Robert's proposal. The opportunity represented everything she had worked toward, but it also meant accepting a level of visibility and responsibility that would fundamentally change her role within the company. She would no longer be an individual contributor working quietly behind the scenes. She would be a department head responsible for managing people and representing Nexus Innovations in high-profile client relationships. Victoria finally spoke up during the meeting, raising concerns about the resource allocation required for Maya's expanded role and questioning whether cultural intelligence consulting was aligned with Nexus Innovations' core business strategy. I worry that we're allowing success at one conference to distract us from our primary focus on product development and market expansion, Victoria said. Robert acknowledged Victoria's concerns, but pointed out that the external interest in Maya's work represented a significant revenue opportunity that could fund additional cultural intelligence capabilities while generating profit for the company. This isn't just about recognition, Robert explained. It's about creating a new business line that leverages our existing expertise. The meeting concluded with approval for Maya's promotion to Director of Cultural Intelligence and Authorization, to begin developing the Center of Excellence. Victoria left the meeting without speaking to Maya, but her expression made clear that she considered this outcome a significant defeat. Maya found herself in the unexpected position of having won a professional battle that she hadn't fully realized she was fighting. Victoria's systematic campaign to undermine Maya's influence had ultimately backfired, resulting in Maya receiving even greater responsibility and recognition than she had previously possessed. Maya's victory felt different from the competitive triumphs that characterized most corporate success stories. She had prevailed not by attacking Victoria or playing political games, but by focusing on the quality of her work and demonstrating its value to external audiences. Maya's authentic approach to professional challenges had proven more effective than Victoria's strategic maneuvering. The conference presentation had transformed Maya's career trajectory in ways that exceeded her most optimistic expectations. She had evolved from an insecure college dropout to a recognized industry expert whose insights were sought by major corporations and consulting firms. The transformation had happened through Maya's commitment to meaningful work rather than self-promotion, proving that authentic expertise could overcome political manipulation. Maya realized that her success represented validation not just of her individual capabilities, but of Robert's leadership philosophy that valued substance over performance, collaboration over competition, and long-term thinking over short-term positioning. The Cultural Intelligence Center of Excellence would allow Maya to scale her impact while remaining true to the values that had made her work valuable in the first place. As Maya began planning for her expanded role, she understood that her journey from invisible bookstore employee to industry thought leader had been possible because Robert had created an environment where quiet competence could flourish. Maya's success was as much about finding the right context for her talents as it was about developing those talents themselves. 2 years after the Singapore conference, Maya stood in the reception area of the newly opened Nexus Cultural Intelligence Center, watching as the final touches were being applied to an exhibition that would showcase how cultural understanding could transform global business relationships. The center occupied an entire floor of a renovated warehouse in San Francisco's Mission District, designed as both a working research facility and a demonstration space where companies could experience culturally intelligent design principles. Firsthand, the transformation in Maya's life had been so complete that sometimes she barely recognized the anxious young woman who had once hidden behind textbook stacks, terrified of drawing attention to herself. Maya now managed a team of 12 cultural researchers, anthropologists and business analysts who worked with technology companies around the world to prevent the kinds of expensive cultural misunderstandings that had once cost businesses millions of dollars. Maya's team included Dr. Priya Sharma, a linguistic anthropologist who specialized in South Asian markets, Marcus Johnson, a former Peace Corps volunteer with expertise in African technology adoption patterns, and Elena Rodriguez, a business psychologist who studied how cultural values affected workplace productivity and collaboration tools. Each team member brought deep expertise in specific regions or cultural dynamics, allowing the center to provide nuanced guidance for virtually any international expansion challenge. The center's success had exceeded everyone's expectations, including Maya's own. In its first year of operation, the Cultural Intelligence Center had consulted with over 60 companies, prevented an estimated $40 million in cultural missteps, and helped clients achieve user adoption rates that averaged 30%, higher than industry benchmarks for international product launches. Maya's work had evolved far beyond individual consulting projects to encompass research that was influencing how the entire technology industry thought about global expansion. She had published papers in leading business journals, spoken at conferences on 4 continents, and advised government agencies on how cultural intelligence could improve international trade relationships. The most surprising aspect of Maya's success was how natural leadership had begun to feel once she had found the right context for her strengths. Maya had discovered that she was an effective manager precisely because she didn't try to control or dominate her team members. Instead, she created environments where other people's expertise could flourish, asking thoughtful questions and facilitating collaborations that produced insights none of them could have achieved individually. Maya's leadership style reflected the same principles that had made her cultural research valuable: careful observation, patient listening, and deep respect for different perspectives and approaches. Her team meetings felt more like academic seminars than corporate strategy sessions, with Maya guiding discussions that allowed each team member to contribute their unique insights while building toward comprehensive solutions. The exhibition, opening that evening, would celebrate the center's 2nd anniversary, while showcasing case studies that demonstrated the business value of cultural intelligence across different industries and markets. Maya had spent months preparing presentations that would illustrate how cultural understanding had helped companies avoid expensive mistakes while building more meaningful relationships with international partners and customers. One of the featured case studies involved a healthcare technology company that had been struggling to gain adoption for a patient monitoring app in several Latin American countries. Traditional market research had suggested strong demand for digital health solutions, but the app had failed to achieve meaningful user engagement despite positive technical reviews and aggressive marketing campaigns. Maya's team had discovered that the app's emphasis on individual health tracking and personal responsibility conflicted with cultural values that prioritized family-centered healthcare decisions and community-based wellness approaches. The solution hadn't been to abandon the Latin American markets, but to redesign the app around extended family networks and community health goals. The redesigned app had achieved user adoption rates that exceeded the company's most optimistic projections, while also improving health outcomes by leveraging existing social structures that supported behavior change and long-term wellness habits. The case study demonstrated how cultural intelligence could improve both business results and social impact when applied thoughtfully to product development. Another featured case study involved Maya's work with a financial services company that had been trying to enter Southeast Asian markets with a digital lending platform. The company's initial approach had emphasized speed, convenience, and individual credit decisions, features that had been successful in Western markets but had failed to resonate with potential users in Thailand, Malaysia, and Vietnam. Maya's research had revealed that successful lending platforms in Southeast Asian markets needed to incorporate concepts of community endorsement, relationship-based trust, and flexible repayment structures that accommodated extended family financial obligations. The cultural intelligence insights had led to a complete reimagining of the platform that honored local approaches to financial relationships while providing the technological capabilities that users wanted. As guests began arriving for the exhibition opening, Maya found herself reflecting on the unlikely journey that had brought her to this moment. The transformation had begun with a simple act of kindness toward an elderly man who needed help crossing a busy street. But it had continued because Maya had found the courage to pursue opportunities that aligned with her values, rather than conforming to expectations that felt inauthentic. Chen arrived early to the exhibition, as he always did for events celebrating Maya's achievements. Their professional relationship had evolved into a mentorship that continued to shape both of their approaches to business leadership and social responsibility. Robert had recently announced his intention to step back from day-to-day operations at Nexus Innovations, spending more time on philanthropic initiatives that use technology to address global inequality and social justice issues. Maya, Robert said as he examined the exhibition displays, I hope you understand that what you've built here represents something much larger than business consulting. You've created a model for how cultural understanding can become a competitive advantage while also promoting greater empathy and connection across differences. Maya appreciated Robert's perspective, but she had learned to think about her work in terms of practical impact rather than abstract ideals. The Cultural Intelligence Center had succeeded because it solved real problems for real companies while helping them build more respectful and effective relationships with international partners and customers. Victoria Sterling had eventually left Nexus Innovations to join a traditional consulting firm that specialized in aggressive market penetration strategies for emerging economies. Maya had heard through industry contacts that Victoria's new role involved helping companies enter international markets as quickly and cost-effectively as possible, with minimal consideration for cultural factors that might slow down expansion. Timelines. Maya felt no animosity toward Victoria, recognizing that there were legitimate different approaches to international business development. Victoria's aggressive, data-driven strategy probably worked well for certain types of companies and market situations. Maya's approach was different rather than superior, focused on sustainable long-term relationships rather than rapid short-term gains. The exhibition opening drew an audience that reflected the diverse impact of Maya's work. Technology executives, academic researchers, government officials involved in international trade, and representatives from non-profit organizations that worked on global development issues. Maya had invited her former colleagues from the community college bookstore, including Mrs. Rodriguez, who had followed Maya's career with proud amazement. Maya's parents attended the opening with obvious pride, though they still seemed slightly bewildered by their daughter's transformation from anxious college dropout to internationally recognized expert. They had gradually come to understand that Maya's success had required her to follow a path that honored her authentic strengths rather than trying to force herself into conventional expectations about career advancement. Kevin had become one of Maya's most trusted advisors, helping her think through the strategic implications of different consulting opportunities and serving as a sounding board when she faced challenging decisions about the center's growth and direction. Maya's success had strengthened their sibling relationship, while also providing Kevin with insights about cultural dynamics that had improved his own engineering work on international projects. During the exhibition's opening presentation, Maya shared stories about projects that had transformed her understanding of how technology could either bridge or widen cultural divides, depending on how thoughtfully it was designed and implemented. She talked about companies that had discovered new market opportunities by understanding cultural needs that traditional research had missed, and partnerships that had flourished when cultural intelligence helped bridge communication gaps that had previously seemed insurmountable. Maya's favorite case study involved an education technology company that had been trying to develop online learning platforms for rural communities in sub-Saharan Africa. The company's initial approach had been based on Western assumptions about individual learning and competitive achievement, but Maya's research had revealed that successful educational interventions needed to incorporate cultural values about collective learning, respect for elder knowledge, and community-based problem-solving. The resulting platform had become one of the most successful educational technology initiatives in the region, not because it had overcome cultural barriers, but because it had embraced and leveraged cultural strengths that existed within the communities it served. The case study illustrated Maya's core philosophy that cultural differences should be viewed as resources rather than obstacles. As the evening progressed, Maya found herself in conversations with executives who wanted to understand how cultural intelligence could be integrated into their own company's strategic planning processes. Many of them had attended Maya's conference presentations or read her published research, but they wanted practical guidance about implementation strategies and organizational changes that would support culturally intelligent decision-making. Maya had developed standardized training programs and consulting frameworks that could be adapted for different industries and company sizes, but she was careful to emphasize that cultural intelligence required ongoing commitment rather than one-time training interventions. Companies that succeeded with cultural integration were those that embedded cultural considerations into their regular business processes rather than treating them as special projects or external requirements. The exhibition's most popular display featured an interactive demonstration of how cultural intelligence could improve user experience design for international markets. Visitors could experiment with different interface designs, communication styles, and feature sets to see how cultural factors affected user engagement and satisfaction across different demographic groups. Maya watched as technology executives, who had probably never considered cultural factors beyond language translation, discovered how deeply culture influenced user behavior, decision-making processes, and social interaction preferences. The demonstration helped people understand that cultural intelligence wasn't about political correctness or social responsibility, but about designing products that actually worked for the people who were supposed to use them. As the evening concluded, Maya felt a deep sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with professional recognition or career advancement. She had found a way to contribute meaningfully to making international business relationships more respectful, more effective, and more beneficial for everyone involved. Maya's work was helping companies avoid cultural mistakes while also promoting greater understanding across differences that often divided communities and countries. Maya's journey from invisible bookstore employee to cultural intelligence pioneer proved that authentic expertise, developed through careful observation and genuine respect for others, could create opportunities that traditional networking and self-promotion might never achieve. Her success demonstrated that quiet competence, supported by the right environment and leadership, could influence entire industries while remaining true to values that prioritized substance over performance. The most important lesson Maya had learned was that professional success didn't require abandoning your authentic self or conforming to expectations that felt uncomfortable. Instead, success came from finding contexts where your natural strengths could flourish and contribute to something larger than individual advancement. Maya's story reminded everyone who knew her that the most powerful changes often began with simple human kindness, careful attention to others' needs, and the courage to offer help without expecting recognition or reward. The shy girl who had helped an elderly man cross a busy street had discovered that her greatest strength lay not in becoming more visible, but in helping others see possibilities they had never noticed before. If Maya's journey from invisible to invaluable has inspired you, if you've ever felt overlooked or underestimated, or if you believe that authentic kindness and quiet competence can change the world, show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to this channel. Maya's story proves that sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is simply refuse to hide your gifts from a world that desperately needs them. Your next dose of inspiration about ordinary people creating extraordinary impact is just one subscribe away. And remember that your own unique perspective might be exactly what someone else needs to see their potential clearly.